Hello there and welcome. I am Samson Websi in Yaoundé with the entire team of Political Focus with another installment of the program. Cameroon's National Day was celebrated last Monday, the 20th of May 2019, though at different speeds in different parts of the country. Yet it was a moment to remember that 47 years ago, that is on the 20th of May 1972, Cameroonians on both sides of the River Mungo voted in a referendum to end the federal system of government in favor of a unitary system. Since that event in 1972, much water has gone under the bridge with each tidal wave, bringing along its own trials, tribulations and triumphs. But this time around, unlike in the past, the tidal waves seem to have come with a tempest, ruffling as it were the apparent quiet and peaceful coexistence that prevailed among Cameroonians. In fact, it would be pretentious and self-deceptive to say that the National Day celebration this year was not dampened by the bloody conflict in the northwest and southwest regions, the spate of terrorist attacks in the far north region, the insecurity headaches in the Adamawa and East regions, as well as the burden of the internally displaced Cameroonians from these different flashpoints. At least Prime Minister John Gute Joseph will bear testimony to the cloud of unease looming large over some parts of Cameroon. He who just returned from peace crusading in the northwest and southwest regions on a presidential assignment to create a window of peace and dialogue, even as tempers are yet to cool down on either side. Perhaps as the Prime Minister settles down to reflect on the way forward, it may be useful to all of us Cameroonians to peruse the latest history book by Professor Victor Julius Ngo. For whether we like it or not, the non-mastery or distortion of the true facts of Cameroon's political history are much to blame for the crisis we now face today. That is why in today's program, we will revisit Cameroon's historical past and also explore possible solutions to what now stands out as one of the most serious existential challenges to Cameroon's reputation as an island of peace in a turbulent ocean. Stay tuned. I will be right back. Welcome back. Let's now revisit the political week in Cameroon as seen by our colleagues of the newspapers. Charles Tembe has our press review.
The 47th National Day in Cameroon graced the newspaper headlines this week. The national bilingual daily Cameroon Tribune reports that May 20 was a triumph of unity as it provided an occasion for communion between President Paul Biya, the defense forces and the Cameroonian people across the country. The Voice says May 20 saw a historic Anglophone boycott and giant diaspora protest, but adds that the CBDM party showcased its political strength in Messager and Cambe in the northwest region. For the Sun, National Day was marked by impressive outings, boycotts and gunshots in the northwest and southwest regions. The Post, on its part, reports that Southwest chiefs defied Governor Okala Bilai by boycotting May 20 celebrations in the region. Prime Minister Joseph Ndiongute's recent visit to the troubled northwest and southwest regions also features prominently in the press. Cameroon Tribune reports that the peace message from President Paul Biya carried to the northwest and southwest and the several audiences the Prime Minister granted different segments of the population speak of government's manifest will to see a return to normal life in the two English-speaking regions. The Horizon's headlines, in search of peaceful solution to Anglophone crisis, PM insists guns don't dialogue, people do. Adding newspaper questions, who is trying to sabotage PM's peace moves? reporting that the Minister of Territorial Administration, Paul Natanganji, has contradicted the PM over the agenda of the promised dialogue. According to the paper, the Territorial Administration boss, speaking on France 24 television, affirmed that the form of the state is non-negotiable. This after the PM had announced that the head of state is favorably disposed to an inclusive dialogue to discuss everything except secession. But Mutasong cites Mr. Tanganji as saying there was no contradiction between his statements and those of the PM, who he claims never said the issue of federalism would feature in the announced dialogue to resolve the Anglophone crisis. That will be it for Political News Review this week.
Charles Tembe. Cameroonians on the 20th of May 2019 celebrated the 47th anniversary of an important event in the political life of their country. But even as Cameroonians celebrated their National Day, it could be observed that many Cameroonians don't know anything about the origin of that day, let alone other important historical dates and events in the life of the country. After all, Cameroon history is not taught as a compulsory subject as it is the case in other countries in the world. And so, in the light of the many distorted facts on Cameroon history that prevail on Cameroon's media space, Sam Bukuba went investigating how much Cameroonians know about their history.
It has been said that the human being is a historical being. He is made by history and he makes history. But what is history? Dr. Anthony Ndi, a historian and author of several books on Cameroon history.
Talk of a story of the past. You begin to put together these stories of the past and then you analyze them, you interpret them, you give the causes, the cause and the effects of the results. You start doing that already in secondary school. And by the time you do high school and university, you use the facts you have read, you have come across, you analyze them, and then come out with your own conclusions.
History is therefore recorded accounts of reality not lived by everybody at the same time, but which are capable of influencing the future. And do Cameroonians really know their history? Abel Akara, teacher, a strategic communication professional.
Cameroonians know their history to a good measure, but history was not taught everywhere in Cameroon the same. Some people who grew up in Cameroon west of the Mongo were taught history a bit differently from those who grew up in Cameroon east of the Mongo, and justifiably so, because you had to understand your own context.
For Cameroonians to know their history, they must read books on Cameroon history. However, it has been observed that Cameroonians generally don't read, as reflected in the poverty of their debates and conversations on Cameroon history. Mr. Nchechuma Banla is a journalist, communication and public relations manager of the Douala Port Authority and lecturer at the St. Jerome Catholic University in Douala.
People don't read in Cameroon. If you listen to debates about what is happening in Cameroon, about problems in the Cameroon today, problems related to history, it is very, very pathetic. Even the current history, with events that are happening, there is already a lot of distortion in the presentation of facts and in the narration of facts and in the orientation of facts. There is a serious deficit as far as the mastery of the history of Cameroon is by a cross-section of the population.
And what could possibly be at the root of the problem of poor mastery of knowledge on Cameroon history?
It all started with what used to be the history syllabus in primary schools and secondary schools in those days, where there was articulate emphasis on teaching European histories to students at primary schools and students at secondary schools, and many of them ended up carrying out research mainly on a history that was not their own. And when they tried to carry research, they ended up not having enough academic material at their own disposal.
The shortfalls in the teaching of Cameroon history aside, there is an emerging trend today whereby strands of history dangerously compete in the public place. Akara teacher speaks about this medley of Cameroon history.
The first one I'll call history. That is recounting things as they happened in the past. For instance, that slaves from what is now known as Cameroon left through Bimbia to go to the west, or that the Douala chiefs in the 19th century actually asked for the British to come and annex them. The second category I'll call historical propaganda. This is a kind of history that's been told by the strong, by people in power. They are recounting the words or the accounts of people who were in power at a given time. For instance, it had been recounted for a long time that the Prime Minister's Lodge in Boya was built by the Germans, whereas actually it is locals who were coerced into putting up that building. Why? Because they had to pay reparation for the disgrace that Kuvali Kenya inflicted on the Germans. So that's historical propaganda. Now there is propagandist history, and a lot of that is happening in media arenas today, where you have someone who is called an expert because he has a certain accreditation to a certain media organization. He or she comes along all the time to warp and mangle and tinker history the way they deem fit in order to support a certain political agenda. And then there is denialist history, people just refusing that certain things did happen, that we did come from somewhere. People who just thinking that, we just came out of thin air. And it's causing a lot of problems. The confusion is being manufactured by some people belonging to a particular class. It is being engineered by particular kinds of media, and then it is being taken over by people in the social media realm, where people begin to struggle to support this or that historical discourse. So at the end of the day, is there history, or is it just a bunch of discourses that each one tries to support, that each one tries to buttress using all kinds of facts, be they fake, be they real?
Fake or real history, that is what Dr. Anthony Ndi calls pseudo-history.
Pseudo-history, where people start with an objective. History, unlike other social sciences, when you are carrying out a research project in history, you don't begin with a closed mind. No, your mind is left completely open. You have questions. You want information to the questions which you have raised, or which you have raised to yourself, or which you have explicitly given out. So you don't begin with a hypothesis. Your conclusion depends on the information which you gather from your research. You don't begin with saying, this is what I'm going to get at. No, what you get at is dependent on the information you gather.
The path to take out of pseudo-history or lack of adequate knowledge in Cameroon history is to teach history right from the educational base, suggests Chechuma Banla.
We could start at the base. Some effort is already being done at teaching our own history to our children for them to know the history of the country.
And the teaching of history requires reconstituting the country's history to have an authentic Cameroon history free of distortions. Dr. Anthony Ndi, once again.
At one time, the Minister of Higher Education, Famen Dungu, opened the door and asked the universities, departments of history, to come out with the history of Cameroon. That's as far as it went. I think he did his best. It was left for the various universities to get the faculties together, get the historians together, not necessarily those who reason the same way, people from different views, to sit down and then argue out and bring out what they think is the true history. We have had that happen in Nigeria. Nigeria has Nigerian history written by a number of Nigerian historians put together. That can be done in Cameroon.
Yes, it can be done, and it must be done, reconstituting and teaching the correct Cameroon history, as no nation can build on the foundation of a wrongly recorded history.
Sam Bukupa. Our guest on the program Political Focus today is Professor Victor Julius Ngo. He's a prolific writer and he's just published yet another book on Cameroon history. You're welcome to the program, Prof.
Thank you very much.
Can you tell us the title and what is contained in the book?
The book is titled Cameroon 1884 to Present, that is 2018, The History of a People. And it is a book of 11 chapters, revised and updated book of Cameroon 1884 to 1985. It is fully revised and updated because it includes several issues which the previous book did not. Chapter 1 talks of the migration and peopling of Cameroon. Chapter 2 talks of German administration in Cameroon. Chapter 3, Cameroon and World War I. Chapter 4, French Cameroon to 1946. That's 1916 to 1946. Then chapter 5 talks of French Cameroon from 1946 to 1960. That is when they tell to achieve independence. Chapter 6 talks of British Southern Cameroon from 1916 to 1960. And chapter 7 talks of the very important and controversial independence of British Southern Cameroon. Chapter 8 talks of Cameroon under Amadou Ahidjo, 1961 to 1982. Chapter 9 talks of Cameroon under Paul Biya from 1982 to present. Chapter 10 talks of multi-party politics in Cameroon, which we all know, the reintroduction of multi-party politics in the 1990s, right up to 2018. That chapter ends with the 7 October 2018 presidential elections, or what went into the 2018 presidential elections, with Maurice Kamto talking of he was asked to kick a penalty, he took the penalty and scored, and or what went into it. And then chapter 11 is a very interesting, burning issue of Anglophone problem, which finally led to the Anglophone crisis that erupted in October and November 2016. And I discuss who is an Anglophone, what is the origin of the Anglophone problem, what is the Anglophone problem, why the eruption of the crisis in October and November 2016, the humanitarian consequences, the political consequences, the economic consequences, and it ends in 2018 with the disarmament commission put in place by President Paul Biya, and of course the failed Anglophone General Conference that Cardinal Christian Toomey called. So that's in brief the work. And of course, burning issues such as the 1972 referendum, the 1960, did Southern Cameroon achieve independence before negotiating for reunification or not?
Prof, when we look at Cameroon history during the period that you've covered, there are some very dark areas maybe which other historians have not been able to handle. Can you tell us some of those areas that you've highlighted in the book?
Some of the areas, for instance, include the secret agreement that Dr. EML Ndeli and the KNC signed with Obafemi Awolowo's Action Group in 1954, the secret financial request that the KNDP under John Gough Frontier made to support prison in 1956, and of course the reasons why the KNDPC defeated the KNC-KPP alliance in 1959, and of course the whole issue of the collapse of the third option, because if you are versed with Cameroon history, you should understand that there were three options as far as Southern Cameroon's search for independence was concerned: independence in association with Nigeria, independence by reuniting with the French Cameroon, and independence as a separate political entity. And why is it that this popular choice, the third choice of Southern Cameroon as an independent state, did not succeed? So I've handled that. And of course the controversial conferences, the Yaoundé meeting of 22nd May 1961, during which Amadou Ahidjo gave Frontier the draft constitution with the understanding that Frontier will present it to the Southern Cameroon's delegate at the All-Bamenda Constitutional Conference of June 1961, which Frontier failed to do. And then the Fumba Conference of July 1961, which some Cameroonian historians and activists believe or insist that there was a constitution which emerged from the Fumba Conference, whereas in fact what emerged from the Fumba Conference were constitutional proposals. Unfortunately, while the National Assembly of the Republic of Cameroon deliberated and approved the draft constitution, the Southern Cameroon's House of Assembly and the Southern Cameroon's House of Chiefs did not deliberate on the draft.
If you are just tuning in, this is Political Focus, coming to you from the national station of the CRTV in Yaoundé. Our guest is Professor Victor Julius Ngo, who has just published a history book on Cameroon. We will be back with him. You are welcome back to Political Focus. Our guest today is Professor Victor Julius Ngo, author of a new book, Cameroon, 1884 to present, that is 2018, The History of a People. When the Southern Cameroons, which was administered as part of Eastern Nigeria, when they moved back, what was their status in relation to the French part of the country?
Southern Cameroons from 1946 until October 1961 was a trust territory administered by the British. There's this distortion saying that once Nigeria achieved independence on 1st October 1960, Southern Cameroon became independent. It is not true, and the record should be set straight. And this concept of saying that Southern Cameroon achieved independence and then reunited or negotiated for reunion with the Republic of Cameroon is false. Southern Cameroon was never independent. And to get the record straight, you should just ask the simple question. Those who insist that Southern Cameroon was independent, let them tell us what was the national anthem of Southern Cameroon as an independent country. What was the national flag of Southern Cameroon as an independent country? What was the motto? What was the seal of Southern Cameroon as an independent state? These are all attributes of independence. And of course, this is a very interesting story that one Cameroonian political activist, Molanjo Litumbe, argues that there was no reunion agreement signed and deposited at the UN Secretariat. It's just like somebody goes to a friend's house, sees the daughter, and gets the friend's daughter to stay with him without any marriage certificate. 1960 to October 1961, Southern Cameroon was not, I repeat, not a member of the United Nations. And consequently, they are wrong to say Article 102 should have been applied. And secondly, Article 102 refers to legal negotiations. The union between Southern Cameroon and the Republic of Cameroon was a political process, and the political process was sanctioned by a UN-supervised plebiscite. And in October 1961 in New York, the United Nations approved the results of the UN-supervised plebiscite.
You made mention of the controversy surrounding the issue of the third option. What finally happened that there was no such third option?
In fact, the third option was the most popular option. And this gives me the opportunity and gives Cameroonians the opportunity to understand that Article 76B of the UN Charter states clearly in a summary form, Britain and France are called upon to administer the respective peoples of their territory towards self-government or independence, depending on the circumstances and the will of the people. Means what? During that period from 1946 right up to 1960, it was insisted on, rightly or wrongly, that Southern Cameroon was not rich enough to survive as a separate political state. Although KNDP officials like Augustin Gomjwa and PM Kemcha argued that Southern Cameroon was, but the overall understanding at the end of the day was that Southern Cameroon was not rich to survive as an independent state. That is, depending on the circumstances. Then the will of the people was to get it through a plebiscite, and that's how you have the plebiscite. Unfortunately, this very important option, Southern Cameroon as an independent state, which was popular, even the Fons and Chiefs in 1956 made it very clear. Fon Achirimbi repeated it in 1959. We want neither water nor fire, which meant they wanted neither reunification nor association. Unfortunately, that was not the view of the One Cameroon Party, that was not the view of the UPC. And even the KNDP, led by Foncha, did not come out strongly in support of it. I will give you two instances. In October 1960, it was realized that the third option was very popular. And in spite of the UN resolution in September, October 1959, which called for UN plebiscite on association with Nigeria or Republic of Cameroon, in spite of that, J.O. Field, the commissioner of Southern Cameroon, was able to convince the KNDP, the CPNC, and the others to move to London to discuss the possibility of granting independence to Southern Cameroon straight without any string attached. So in October, the British government was inclined towards accepting that, although all along the British government tailored its policy covertly towards Southern Cameroon achieving independence in association with Nigeria. But in October 1960, the British government now was inclined to accept independence as a separate state, and Foncha was informed. For whatever reason which I cannot explain, Foncha informed Nde Tumaza. Nde Tumaza's political platform was not the same as KNDP. Nde Tumaza stood for reunification
of the two Cameroons.
Yes. So when Foncha informed Nde Tumaza immediately informed Dr. Felix Roland Momi of the UPC. And the One Cameroon and the UPC parties and officials were furious. And Dr. Felix Roland Momi, with the support of Kwame Nkrumah, Nasser of Egypt, immediately phoned the UK representative at the UN, Sir Andrew Cohen, and warned the British that should the British grant Southern Cameroon's independence as a separate state, the UPC, quote-unquote, will rain hell on Southern Cameroon, end of quote. And you should bear in mind that this was the period when the French were suffering in Algeria. The British were having problems with the Kenya, the Mau Mau, and all that. And of course, the British got scared. And because the African group in the UN, influenced by Kwame Nkrumah, Sekou Touré, and Nasser, quickly made it known that they would not support Southern Cameroon's independence as a separate state. So this now made it difficult. When the Southern Cameroon delegation now met in London in November 1960, word came from New York that the Southern Cameroon file cannot be reopened. So historians and Cameroonians should know why.
These intricacies of history, do you see any link between these intricacies and the problems we have today? The problem which is known as the Anglophone problem that evolved into the Anglophone crisis?
Of course, you see, the Anglophone problem should be stated clearly. And it is the responsibility of historians, political scientists, and policymakers to be honest and state it correctly and objectively. Unfortunately, although we say we are Anglophones, we have Anglophone values, Anglophone norms, there's the strong tendency among some Anglophones or some Cameroonians that if you don't say what they want to hear, they threaten you. That is not Anglophone value. The Anglophone value, Anglophone norms is clear. Even if I don't agree with what you are saying, I will support your right to say it. That is the Anglophone value. So coming back to your question, the Anglophone problem is not a problem of appointments. That should be made very clear. It's not a problem of second-class citizenship. It's not a problem of marginalization. The problem is the failure of successive governments to implement what was agreed in Fumban and in the Yaoundé Tripartite Conference. In Fumban, Amadou Ahidjo and John Gufonja agreed that the two cultures will be allowed to operate in the zones where they are, and they will only be blended at the center. That was it. The two cultures will be allowed to operate where they are. That is in 1961. And they'll be blended only at the center. Which meant that whatever is done, the norms, the culture, the values which existed in Southern Cameroon as of 1961 will be allowed to operate as they were. And the values, culture, norms in the Republic of Cameroon will be allowed to operate. And the two will only be blended at the center. It is that failure, and aggravated by poor governance in certain instances, which gave rise to the Anglophone crisis.
When you say it was a failure, we know that after 1961, there has been this policy of harmonization of a number of things. Will you call that a failure, or you call it some deliberate attempt to fuse the two together?
You see, it is important to recall the confidential letter that Bernard Folong wrote to Amadou Ahidjo on behalf of the KNDP, saying that although the KNDP and the UC had agreed on an agreement working together, but more and more the advice, the values of the KNDP were not recognized, and that threatened the unity of the federation. So that's the problem. If those issues were resolved, and I will give you one example. Late in 1961, Amadou Ahidjo signed a decree which reorganized the Federal Republic of Cameroon, creating 6 administrative units, and West Cameroon was one of those administrative units. And West Cameroon had a federal administrator. The other 5 regions also had federal administrators. The other 5 regions had but 1 PM. West Cameroon had 1 PM, which meant that they recognized that West Cameroon was different. Unfortunately, the authority of the Prime Minister of West Cameroon was weakened by the presence of the federal administrator, to the extent that if the Prime Minister of West Cameroon wanted to take any political decision in West Cameroon, he had to get permission from the federal inspector, to the extent that the West Cameroon government wrote to Ahidjo complaining that this whole arrangement has transformed the West Cameroon Prime Minister into a puppet. And you have to bear in mind that at this time, John Gufonja was Vice President of the Federal Republic of Cameroon and Prime Minister of West Cameroon. So when he came to West Cameroon as Prime Minister, he could not take certain decisions or make certain public pronouncements without the approval of the Federal Inspector, who was regarded as the direct representative of the President of the Federal Republic of Cameroon.
So this should be the situation that prevailed until 1972, when the Federation ended.
Yeah, and although in due course some cosmetic changes were made, but all along there were problems. And in certain instances, when Ahidjo decided to transform the West Cameroon Police Force into the Federal Republic of Cameroon Force, that is to merge the two forces, he discussed it with Foncha. And when eventually it was implemented, Foncha wrote back and said, "I'm surprised that you've done this. I had no idea. I've only heard it over the radio." Ahidjo was embarrassed and reminded Foncha, "On this date I wrote to you, you replied. On this date I wrote to you, you replied. How can you now say you only heard it over the radio?" So these were some of the issues. And of course, the political infighting in West Cameroon, the corruption, the financial difficulties. West Cameroonians prayed Amadou Ahidjo to dissolve dissolve the federal system in favor of a unitary system, which of course played into the hands of Amadou Ahidjo, who since 1960-61, with the support of the powerful federal group, Sector Cameroon and the Republic of Cameroon, that wanted a unitary system, and even went to the extent of saying that a federal system is just a transitional measure. The ultimate goal is a unitary system.
So if I understood you well, it means what provoked the Anglophone crisis is much deeper than what meets the eye.
Of course, Cameroonians should not be deceived. The international community should not be deceived that it is because of trade union grievances by the teachers or trade union grievances by the lawyers. In fact, that was just a pretext. It had been boiling over, and the moment came for it to explode. And if you recall, the trade unions, the teachers and the lawyers kept on increasing the number of grievances. They will agree on 11 points. The next time they meet, it will be 18. The next time they meet, it will be 22. This meant what?
Where we find ourselves, Prof, what do you think should be the way forward? It's very intricate. It's interwoven. There are so many stakes involved.
There are so many stakes involved. And unfortunately, the Anglophones are the main people who have suffered and who are suffering from this crisis. The abduction, the assassination, the cutting of arms. Can you imagine poor CDC workers who try to just get their daily bread? So now looking at what should be done. First of all, those who have taken up arms and the government policymakers, we should all agree that at the end of the day, we are all human beings. And the supreme interest of Cameroon comes first. Genuine dialogue, genuine discussion is the only way out. You cannot discuss genuinely by giving preconditions. Once you start giving preconditions, then you are not for it. And if a conference is to be held, it should be honest. All the stakeholders concerned should be involved in determining how the conference should be. The failure of the very laudable idea of Anglophone General Conference failed. Why? Because it was not well done. It was not well discussed. You cannot have a conference of that magnitude without having agreed with the stakeholders concerned where the conference will take place. What are the terms of reference of the conference? Who are the conveners? We cannot solve a problem by running away from the problem.
Almost everybody is talking about dialogue. You have also made mention of sincere and inclusive dialogue. Who should even organize it?
This is what we should try to avoid. Once you start bringing in foreign influence, because I've had foreign moderator and all that, you are indirectly inviting foreign intervention in the internal affairs of Cameroon. And it shows that Cameroonians have reached a stage where they can no longer have confidence in anybody. But I believe very strongly that Cameroon has the appropriate qualified human resources. If Cameroonians can chair reconciliatory meetings abroad, why is it that they cannot do it in their country? If, for instance, the Catholic Church, the bishops in other African countries that experience crisis can conveniently chair conferences to solve a problem, why can that not be possible?
Don't you see that the problem seems to have been aggravated by so much negative ethnicity that we have around now? Almost everybody is suspicious of every other person.
Yeah, you see, it is more so because Cameroonians don't know their history. If Cameroonians were meant to read and understand their history, Cameroonians will realize that there's a lot to gain from diversity in unity. If Cameroonians knew their history, this wanton corruption, wanton embezzlement would not be. Because if, for instance, you embezzle milliard and your next door neighbor hasn't good drinking water, hasn't electricity, poor roads, poor schools, how do you feel comfortable that your next door neighbor is crying of poverty while you are living in insolent wealth? This is knowing your history. Cameroonians should be made to understand that each and every one of us are the other's keeper, be it in appointments or whatever. And it has been aggravated and made very, very annoying by this whole concept. They appoint you, and then you go to your division or your village, and motions of support are sent to the president, thanking him for having appointed one of us. But there are more than 250 ethnic groups. So how can the president satisfy the 250 ethnic groups? The message they are sending indirectly that those ethnic groups or those divisions or subdivisions who do not have somebody appointed should be angry with President Paul Biya for not appointing one of them.
So, at the end of the day, beyond the fighting that is going on, there is a need for Cameroonians to have a cool head, to look for a way forward. Do you have a kind of profile of the kind of people who should either cheer or be part of any discussion on the way forward?
I think very strongly that if you have members of the civil society and you have religious leaders like Bishop Andrew Kea, Bishop George Nko, Right Reverend Director Emeritus Nyasako, and civil society people from the Northwest and Southwest and the other regions, because it should be emphasized that this crisis has gone beyond the Anglophone crisis. It is now a national crisis. So Cameroonians in all the 10 regions should be involved, either through their representatives. I'm not talking of parliamentarians or senators.
What should be the role of the Cameroonian diaspora that has been very active in this crisis?
Unfortunately, they have done more harm than good.
They must be part of the solution.
It depends who you mean by they. You have level-headed Cameroonians in the diaspora, and you have others who have said nothing short of independence will they accept. Once you take that firm stand, nothing short of independence, it means any meeting that has to take place, most people agree that it will be independent. That's why I say no precondition should be given, be it from the extreme group of Cameroonians in the diaspora or those Cameroonians here. Because you see, what we have to recognize, there are Cameroonians here who support what those in the diaspora, the extremist group, are doing. Let's be honest.
Thank you very much, Professor Victor Julius Ngo, for being guest on the program Political Focus. We reviewed your book in the light of the crisis that Cameroon is going through at the moment, and you were able to give us a lot of hindsight on how it all started, and the ramifications that we are having today, and what should be the way forward. It was a pleasure having you on the program.
Thank you very much. I think I should use the opportunity to thank you, and even say those who are interested in getting copies of the book, maybe I should say they can get it from a Cosmopen Yaoundé, found around Emia roundabout, or from a Librairie de Peuple Noir, just next to SNI building, and in Limbe they can get it from a Embassy bookshop at a Total roundabout in Limbe, and in Boya from Ngasa Mesa Press newspaper. Thank you very much, and I pray that Cameroonians should put aside their differences, work as a team, and the government should not relent. And I would like to use this opportunity to highlight the efforts that the Prime Minister Chief Dr. John Ukute has done so far, which is visits in Northwest and Southwest, but he should carry that forward. He should not let the momentum slip.
And that is where we will draw the curtains on today's program, which included contributions from Charles Tembe and Sam Bukuba. Our sound technicians were Maturin Sopo Kombi and Catherine Wete, while supervision was by Wine Paul Ngam. For presentation in Yaoundé, I have been Samson Websi, thanking you for listening.